I took the job at the Greyhound relay station outside of Hardin, Montana because my cousin's boyfriend knew a guy. That's how most of my employment history reads, if I'm being honest. Someone knew someone, and I needed money badly enough to not ask too many questions. The station sat about 11 miles off the interstate on a state road that didn't see much traffic after dark. It served as a transfer point. Buses coming from Billings or heading toward the Dakotas would stop there to swap drivers, refuel, and occasionally drop off a passenger or two who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. During the day, a woman named Charlene ran the ticket counter, and a maintenance guy named Dennis handled the buses. At night from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., there was just the station attendant. That was me 4 nights a week starting in November. The building itself wasn't much. A single-story cinder block rectangle with a flat roof, built sometime in the early 80s. Inside, you had a waiting area with 16 molded plastic chairs bolted to metal rails, a ticket counter behind plexiglass, 2 restrooms, a utility closet, and a back office where the monitors lived. Outside, there were 3 covered bus bays, a fuel island, and a gravel lot, big enough for maybe 20 cars, though I never saw more than 4. Beyond the lot, nothing. Just dry scrubland and darkness stretching toward the Crow Reservation to the south and the Bighorn River Valley to the west. The nearest building with a light on was a farm supply store about 2 miles back toward town, and it closed at 7. My job was simple. Keep the building open in case a late bus came through. Log arrival and departure times. Make sure nobody vandalized the restrooms or slept in the waiting area past their transfer window. Mop the floors once. Check that the fuel island pumps were locked after the last scheduled bus. And watch the cameras. The camera system was old. 8 feeds displayed on 2 monitors in the back office, cycling in groups of 4. 6 exterior cameras covered the bus bays, fuel island, lot entrance, and 2 angles on the rear of the building. 2 interior cameras watched the waiting area and the hallway leading to the restrooms. The images were grainy, black and white, and had that stuttered frame rate where motion looked like someone flipping through a stack of photographs. Dennis had taped a handwritten note to the desk next to the monitors that said, "Cam 6 has dead pixels. Not broken, just old." Cam 6 covered the east side of the building where there was nothing but a dumpster enclosure and a drainage ditch. I didn't pay much attention to it at first. The first 2 weeks were exactly what you'd expect. Boring. Painfully, numbingly boring. The last bus usually came through around 11:45, sometimes as late as 12:30 if it was running behind out of Billings. After that, the station just sat there. Empty chairs, humming fluorescents, the vending machine in the corner clicking through its refrigeration cycle every few minutes. I'd bring a book or mess around on my phone. The silence was the kind that has texture. You become aware of the building itself, the way the heating ducts ticked when the furnace kicked on, the way the wind outside would press against the doors and make the weather-stripping whistle in a thin, almost musical pitch. I got used to it. The first thing I noticed that I couldn't immediately file away was on a Tuesday night in early December. I was in the back office eating a gas station burrito and half watching the monitors when I saw movement on Cam 3. Cam 3 pointed at the middle bus bay from an elevated angle. The bay was empty. No bus was scheduled until 5:15 a.m. But something moved across the lower third of the frame. It was quick. Just a dark shape passing left to right, close to the ground, maybe 3 feet tall. I assumed it was a dog. We got coyotes out there sometimes, and a stray mutt had been spotted around the property a few weeks before I started. I didn't think about it again that night. 2 nights later, Cam 7, the interior hallway camera, picked up something similar. A shadow that moved across the frame in maybe 2 seconds, left to right, at the far end of the hallway near the restroom doors. The hallway was about 40 feet long, and whatever it was seemed to be at the very end near the wall. I was in the office when I saw it, and my first reaction was annoyance. I thought someone had gotten inside. A transient, maybe, or a kid from town. I grabbed the flashlight from the desk drawer and walked down the hallway myself. Both restroom doors were locked from the outside, the way I'd left them after the last bus. The hallway was empty? The exit door at the far end was locked and alarmed. Green light steady on the push bar. I stood there for a minute, listening. Nothing. Just the faint buzz of the fluorescent tube above me and the tick of the baseboard heater near the floor. I went back to the office and rewound the footage. The system let you scrub back about 6 hours before it started overwriting. I found the timestamp and watched it again. The shape was there, clearly, moving across the bottom of the frame, but on review I couldn't tell if it was actually in the hallway or if it was some kind of visual artifact. A smear on the lens, maybe, or an electrical glitch in the signal. The cameras were old enough that this felt plausible. I wrote it off. Over the next week, it happened 3 more times. Always on a different camera, always between 1 and 4 a.m. Always a dark shape moving laterally across the frame, never pausing, never changing direction. Always at the edges, low, like something moving along the base of a wall or the ground. I started keeping a small notebook. Just times and camera numbers, and not because I believed anything strange was happening, but because I thought if I could show Dennis a pattern, he might finally get authorization to replace the wiring on some of the older cameras. I figured I was documenting an electrical fault. Then, on December 19th, the pattern broke. I was watching Cam 5, which covered the fuel island, because I'd heard something outside. A metallic clang, like a cabinet door caught by the wind. The fuel island had a small metal enclosure around the pump controls, and in high wind, the access panel would sometimes bang open. I was watching to see if that's what it was. The wind was steady that night, maybe 25 miles per hour out of the northwest, and the sodium light over the fuel island was swaying slightly, which made the shadows on the concrete shift in a slow, rhythmic way. The shape appeared from the right side of the frame. Same general size, same low profile, same lateral movement. But this time it stopped. Right in the middle of the fuel island, under the light. It just stopped, and for about 4 seconds, it sat there in the frame. The image was too grainy to make out detail. It was dark, not black exactly, but dark in the way that something absorbing light looks different from something that's simply unlit. It had rough, irregular edges, like a bundle of cloth or a crouched animal. But there was no clear outline of limbs or a head. Then it moved again, continuing left, and passed out of frame. 4 seconds doesn't sound like much, but when you've been watching these things zip through the edge of the frame for 2 weeks, 4 seconds feels like it looked at you. I didn't go outside. I sat in the office chair with my hands on the desk and listened to my own breathing. After a few minutes, I rewound and watched it again. Same thing. The shape, the stop, the 4 seconds, the continuation. I saved the timestamp in my notebook and underlined it twice. Then I did something I hadn't done before. I checked Cam 6. The one Dennis said had dead pixels. The feed was darker than the others, grainier, and the bottom right corner had a cluster of white dots that never moved, which I assumed were the dead pixels he'd mentioned. But the rest of the image was clear enough. It showed the east side of the building, the dumpster enclosure, the drainage ditch, and beyond that, just flat ground disappearing into black. Nothing was on cam 6. I watched it for 10 minutes. Nothing moved. I don't know what I expected. The next afternoon, before my shift, I drove to the station early and walked the perimeter in daylight. I checked the fuel island, nothing. I walked behind the building and looked at the dumpster enclosure and the drainage ditch. The ditch was dry, about 4 feet deep, running parallel to the east wall, and continuing south toward the highway culvert system. At the bottom, in the hard-packed dirt, there were marks. Not footprints exactly, more like drag marks, or the tracks something would leave if it moved by pulling itself forward rather than stepping. They ran the length of the ditch as far as I could see, then faded where the soil turned to gravel near the culvert. I told Dennis about the camera movement. I didn't mention the marks in the ditch. He listened, shrugged, and said the cameras had been doing weird things for years. He told me Charlene had once seen a full human figure standing in bus bay 1 on the monitor. But when the driver pulled in 10 minutes later, there was nothing. He said it like it was a funny anecdote. A quirk of the old system. I asked him if anyone had ever checked the camera housing on cam 6, and he gave me a strange look. He said cam 6 had been disconnected 3 years ago. The feed I was watching, he said, was just residual signal noise. The monitor port wasn't receiving from anything. Whatever I was seeing on that screen was the monitor itself, not a live feed. I went home and sat in my truck in the driveway for about 20 minutes before going inside. I kept thinking about the fact that cam 6 had looked normal to me, not like static, not like a dead channel. It had shown me the building, the dumpster, the ditch, in real time with the correct lighting for the time of night. But according to Dennis, there was no camera sending that image. That night I went back. I had to. I needed the job. Rent was due in 11 days and I had about $400 in my checking account. So I clocked in, made coffee in the little drip machine in the back office, and sat down in front of the monitors. I did not look at cam 6. The last bus came through at 12:07. 2 passengers got off, a woman with a rolling suitcase and a young guy with a backpack who asked me if there was a motel nearby. I told him the closest one was in Hardin and that there wasn't a cab service, but sometimes the farm supply store owner's son would give rides for cash. He nodded, thanked me, and walked out into the lot. I watched him on cam 1 standing near the road for a while. Then he started walking east along the shoulder. I lost him when he left the camera's range. Around 2 a.m., the shape appeared on cam 2. Left to right, same speed, same low profile. I logged it. 12 minutes later, cam 4. Same thing. Then cam 8, the waiting area. I was sitting in the back office, which is separated from the waiting area by a wall and a door with a window in it. If something moved through the waiting area, it was 30 feet away from me, with one wall between us. I got up and looked through the door window. The waiting area was empty. The plastic chairs sat in their bolted rows. The vending machine hummed. The overhead fluorescence cast that flat, shadowless light that makes every surface look like a photograph of itself. Nothing was moving. But on the monitor, the shape crossed the frame, low and steady, moving along the base of the far wall. I pressed my face closer to the door window and stared at the exact spot where the camera showed movement. There was nothing there. The wall was bare. The floor was clean. But on the screen behind me, something was crossing that space with the patience of an animal that doesn't know it's being watched. I went back to the desk and looked at the monitors and made a decision I still think about. I looked at cam 6. The screen showed the east side of the building, the dumpster enclosure, the drainage ditch, all in that slightly darker grain. The dead pixel cluster glowed in the corner, and standing in the ditch, motionless, upright, was a shape that was taller than anything I'd seen on the other cameras. It wasn't crouched or low. It was standing, The proportions were wrong in a way I can describe, but not fully convey. The vertical axis was too long for the width, like something stretched, or like something that had unfolded from the low shape I'd been watching for weeks. It wasn't moving. It was facing the building, facing the wall, facing, I realized slowly, the exact spot on the other side of that wall where I was sitting. The monitor wasn't connected to a camera. Dennis had told me that. There was no camera sending this image. And yet the image was there, sharp enough to see the thing standing in the ditch, still as concrete. I turned off the monitor, not the whole system, just Cam 6's display. I reached behind the unit and pulled the power cable for that screen. It went black. I sat there until 6 a.m. without looking at any of the other feeds. I read nothing. I checked nothing. I listened to the building breathe around me, the ducts, the furnace, the vending machine, and I waited for the sun. When Dennis arrived at 6:15, I told him the Cam 6 monitor had a power issue and I'd unplugged it. He said fine and didn't ask anything else. Charlene came in at 7 and said, "Good morning." I clocked out. I worked there for another 3 months. I never plugged that monitor back in and nobody asked me to. The shapes on the other cameras continued, 2 or 3 times a night, always between 1 and 4. Always that same lateral movement at the edges of the frame. I logged everyone in my notebook. I filled 11 pages. On the last page, I made a small chart showing the frequency by camera and by time. And there was a pattern, but it wasn't one I could make useful sense of. The frequency increased slightly each week by maybe 1 additional appearance per night, with the highest concentration always on Cam 8, the waiting area, and always between 2:30 and 3:15. In March, I got a better paying job doing inventory for a warehouse in Billings, and I put in my 2 weeks. On my last night, I sat in the back office and watched the monitors one final time. The shape appeared on Cam 3 at 1:42, Cam 1 at 1:51, Cam 8 at 2:37, and again at 2:44. I logged them all. At 4 a.m., the building was quiet. The wind had died down. Even the furnace had cycled off. In that silence, I heard something I'd never heard before in all those months. A faint sound from outside the east wall, not a knock, not a scratch. More like a palm being placed flat against cinder block and held there. Just pressure, no rhythm, no repetition, just the sound of something resting against the building, as if it had been doing so for a very long time, and I'd only just gotten quiet enough to hear it. I didn't move. I didn't check. I sat in that plastic office chair and looked at the blank monitor where Cam 6 used to be, and I waited for the light. The notebook is in a shoebox in my closet. I haven't opened it. I drove past the station once about 5 months after I left. It was midday, sunny, and the building looked exactly the same. Squat, plain, unremarkable. Charlene's car was in the lot. A bus was idling in Bay 2. Everything looked ordinary. But I slowed down as I passed. And I looked at the east side of the building, at the wall where the ditch runs, and I noticed something I'd never seen during my walks around the perimeter. The cinder blocks along the bottom 3 feet of that wall were a slightly different shade than the rest. Darker, older looking, as though they'd been exposed to moisture for years, or as though something had been pressed against them night after night, long enough to leave a stain that sunlight couldn't reach. I drove on. I haven't been back.